A mom survived 55 hours of attempted murder after her daughter had let the kidnapper inside. It turns out that this kidnapping had unfortunately involved all 5 of her children. This is an insane case, but it is a survivor story, thankfully, and it also involves a lot of manipulation, control, possible narcissism, and a trial where the defendant was actually the one to cross-examine the victim, meaning he was able to press her on her story and make her relive this trauma for over 4 hours. Once you hear the questions that he was actually asking his victim, you are going to be so infuriated and wonder why this could ever happen in a court of law. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna, and I post every single Sunday here on this channel. I would love for you to subscribe. You could also sign up to my newsletter that I will have right here. All you have to do is put in your email, and then I will personally send you my videos because YouTube doesn't always like to send them out. I just really appreciate you all supporting me, and I know that I get a lot of comments saying, oh my gosh, I didn't see this video, I didn't get a notification. So I would like to just personally be able to send them to you, and that would just make me so incredibly happy. But first, a quick moment for our sponsor, Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, and in a world where we spend so much time online already scrolling through random social media trends, why not actually learn something while you're online? Skillshare has a learn by doing approach and an on-demand platform where you can learn at your own pace. You can use it for your career, for hobbies, for side hustles. There's topics such as illustration, productivity, design, entrepreneurship, and I've been taking How to Organize Your Workflow to Maximize Productivity by Ali Abdaal. Now, he teaches about the pilot, plane, and engineer model, which has been so cool to learn about. It's already helping me balance all of the work that needs to be done. But I'm telling you this because Skillshare is giving the first 500 of you to use the link in the description 1 month free trial of Skillshare. Imagine how much you can learn for free in a month. Just click that link down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2017 in Florida, and Alisa was a single mother living in Rico with her 5 children. This was 14-year-old Arden, 12-year-old Landon, 7-year-old Bryn, 5-year-old Grady, and 3-year-old Cooper. Now, Alisa was 45 years old, and she was separated from her husband, the children's father, who had been together for about 16 years, but they were now separated, and Alisa was dating once again. But unfortunately, that March, she would endure hours of torture, and no one would even know that she was missing or kidnapped until 24 hours later, when her abductor made his first mistake, because that wasn't where the abduction ended. On March 11th of 2017, Alisa was home with 3 of her children. This was Arden, Bryn, and Grady. So Landon and Cooper were visiting their father at the time he was with them. And that day, Alisa actually woke up in the middle of the night. She had fallen asleep in bed, and her younger kids, Bryn and Grady, had wanted to sleep in the bed with her, so they were sleeping next to her. This wouldn't be a natural wake up, however, because Alisa would feel dripping on her head and she would be startled awake. When her eyes opened, she would see a man standing over her, dripping water onto her. Before she knew what was happening, she was being dragged onto the floor in her room and to the living room. Bryn and Grady woke up to these sounds of a struggle and began screaming. The intruder told them to go back to their mother's room and not to come out. Now, Alisa tried to get to the door to escape, but he threw her backwards. He overpowered her, and during this chaos, Alisa began to think that possibly her 14-year-old Arden would hear all of this and be able to call the police for help. But around 5 a.m., which was probably about 4 or 5 hours later, Arden would walk back into the home she had been outside of, and she looked at her mother, and her mother quickly realized she was not going to be calling 911 because she knew this man was going to be there. The intruder then ordered the eldest child, 14-year-old Arden, to take the 2 siblings in the home, Bryn and Grady, and drive them to his home, essentially leaving himself and Alisa alone. But how did 14-year-old Arden know this intruder and know where his home was? Well, she had been there. This is where her 2 other siblings were at the time. This was her father's home. Alisa knew her attacker. It was her estranged ex-husband, Trevor Summers. But this isn't a usual case of domestic violence, and although those are very scary, this is even darker. Arden knew that her father was coming over to her mother's home that day. In fact, she had let him inside. You see, Trevor had told the eldest daughter that he wanted to talk to their mother about reconciliation, which Alisa had not previously wanted. Trevor told Arden that he wanted to get back together with her mother. But Trevor knew that if he had gone up to the door, her mother would not have answered or wanted to speak to him. So he enlisted his daughter to leave a window open for him in order for him to climb in. Arden did as her father told her, both with the window and taking her siblings on that drive, even though her only driving experience was in a parking lot. Suddenly, it was Alisa and the man she had divorced. It was only the two of them. But this wasn't just an amicable divorce. Trevor had been ordered by the court to stay away from Alisa. She had gotten this separation over Trevor's control of her life 4 years prior to that. They met in high school in 1995, and 3 years later they started dating. 3 years after that, they married. Trevor wanted to start a family right away, and Alisa wanted to be a mom so badly and stay home with the kids. So they started having children. But she also noticed that with the birth of every child, because they would have 5, Trevor began to control her life even more. He would tell her that she couldn't be friends with a male on Facebook, she couldn't sit next to any male in public, especially at church, and she couldn't ride alone in the car with a man. She was to have no communication with men unless it was him. Alisa also started to notice that while Trevor had this landscape and pool design company, and he also dabbled in real estate, finances were not adding up. He was opening a lot of businesses and then he would move on from them. And due to this, the family was moving a lot as well before landing in Florida. So Alisa would notice that Trevor was often in debt with bouncing checks, and she knew this because of his arrests. Anytime Alisa tried to talk to Trevor about this, he would blame it on others. It was simply a misunderstanding. But Alisa felt in her gut that something was wrong, and she was walking on eggshells with her husband. She wasn't going to question him. She wanted to stay in his good graces. But finally, in 2016, after 16 years of marriage, she had enough, and she'd asked for a divorce. Trevor begged her to stay, and she did for a while for the kids, but that's when Trevor's possessive behavior got worse. He took Alisa's cell phone and car from her. She was unable to leave the house. In October of 2016, Alisa felt like she was a prisoner in her own home. Trevor didn't go to work for weeks. He was just watching over her, and finally he had to go out for a job. And so Alisa actually called a domestic violence hotline. She told them everything, and they told her that the situation was very serious. She needed to get out. So when Alisa was trying to gather her things, Trevor actually came home and attacked her for trying to leave. She told him she wanted to take the kids somewhere safe, and finally, after talking to Trevor, she was able to talk him into this. So Alisa took the kids to a friend's home, but when Trevor found out where this was, he started showing up. So Alisa then had to take them to a shelter for abused women. They had nothing with them from their home, but they felt safer there. This is when Alisa's life began to turn around. She got a job, she was buying a house and a car, she filed for a divorce, and by February of 2017, a month prior to Trevor standing over her in her living room, Trevor was said to resign himself to the fact that divorce was happening, that their marriage was over. He asked Alisa to come by his home so they could sign the divorce papers. When she arrived, he said that he needed to get everything off of his chest, and he began to say that he had multiple affairs and he was also in serious legal trouble facing prison, which we will get into what that's for in a bit. But when Alisa tried to leave his home because they were not getting anywhere with the divorce paperwork, he held her down, put a knife to her throat. But it wasn't just a kitchen knife, it was a machete. He told her, "I won't tie you up if you just stay still and listen to me." So for the next few hours, she was held at his home, and she talked Trevor down and told him she wouldn't call the police if he let her go, and finally he did. Now, as soon as Alisa escaped, she did call the police, so this was on record. But remember, this was a month prior to Trevor slipping into the open window in her home and dragging her into the living room with their children screaming. So, Alisa had told the police what happened during this incident with the machete, and they went to check her body. They found no marks on her. Then they went to interview Trevor, and he denied threatening her life. So, instead of an arrest, both Alisa and Trevor filed restraining orders. As far as the custody of their children, this would be shared. However, with the restraining orders, it meant that they were not allowed to go to each other's houses. They really weren't allowed to be together. So instead, they would often contact the kids over their cell phones and exchange the kids that way. But the reason that the custody was shared was said to be because Trevor was turning the children against their mother. When they were with their father, Alisa would learn that he was telling them that Alisa was responsible for the broken marriage. She had cheated on him. He also allegedly told them to lie to the police about their mother so he wouldn't get thrown in prison. Shortly after, Alisa arrived back at her home one day after work to find that there was graffiti on the walls and Kool-Aid poured on her bed. The messages on the walls said things like traitor and thanks for being an a-hole. But how would anyone have gotten inside since Trevor didn't have a key to this new home of hers? Well, the kids still had keys to the home because they were living with their mother part-time. And we will learn how that whole situation occurred in a bit. But around this time, the children were all staying with their father, not believed to want to be with their mother. A few weeks later, though, Arden would call her mother saying that she missed her. She wanted to visit and talk through things. So Alisa was really excited because she thought that maybe the children were going to come over, hear her side of the story, and still want her to be their mother. So shortly after, it was Arden, it was Grady, and it was Bryn who would come for a visit. This visit would be on March 11th, when Arden opened the window for her father and then was told by her father to take her siblings back to his home. But now Alisa was alone with her abuser who had just used their children to get himself in the same room with her. Alisa was terrified. She knew the police did not believe her the first time, and it immediately escalated when they were alone. Trevor threw Alisa onto her bed and began to use scarves to wrap her hands together. He also tied her to the bed with Christmas lights, and he was crisscrossing them across her body to hold her down. Trevor then spoke directly to her, saying, "I came to say goodbye. I'm leaving. I chartered a boat. I'm going into international waters, and I'm going to disappear. I have millions in offshore bank accounts." So whether she wanted to or not, Alisa knew how to deal with Trevor. She knew that she had to stay quiet to not infuriate him. Let him do all the talking, so that's what she did here too. Alisa was then forced to take NyQuil to sedate her, and Trevor was threatening her with a razor blade. For the next 2 hours, he had her tied up, her ankles and wrists behind her in a hog-tied position, and he would tie her up with a nylon rope, raping her 2 times. She was in excruciating pain, but Trevor wasn't done with the torture. He used her thumb to try to get into her cell phone, and then he began recording a video. She heard him say,
I am here with Alisa at her house, where I'm not supposed to be. And I woke Alisa up, and I have been holding her against her will. She's virtually unharmed. She's got a couple bruises today, but from tying her up.
Trevor then told Alisa that he was making these videos so that she could prove that he was there when he went on the boat to disappear. Trevor kept her hostage for the next 8 hours before coming back into the room and placing a pillow over her face. She felt all of his weight on her face as she lost consciousness. Alisa believed she was going to die right then and there, but then suddenly, after she believed she lost consciousness, the pillow was removed and she could breathe again. Immediately, she began to plead for her life, saying, "Please, I'll do anything, don't kill me." And then he asked, "You'll agree to go with me?" referring to the boat he was going to go on. She said she would. Alisa didn't think that Trevor actually had a plan to leave, but she was going to say anything she needed to survive. So after 24 hours hostage, placed into her SUV, still tied up, and Trevor began to drive. You see, he was out of NyQuil, what he had been using to sedate her this whole time. So he drove to the local Walgreens. Now he pulled in, he ran inside, and that is when Alisa knew that it was her time. She opened the door and she started running, but she was still tied up, so she was stumbling through the parking lot. Within seconds, she could hear him behind her. He grabbed her, lifted her off the ground, and pushed her back inside the SUV. Trevor was furious at this point. He drove through the streets and suddenly pulled over, bringing out his blade to cut her wrist. He said, "That's for getting out of the car at Walgreens. You agreed to go with me. Why are you doing this?" He then began driving once again with Alisa bleeding. They drove throughout the night along back roads. Meanwhile, they didn't know that they were actually already on the run from police because someone had called the police. It just wasn't the children. You see, when Alisa had gotten out of the SUV at the Walgreens, a Walgreens employee who was taking a smoke break saw what happened. He called 911 saying some chick just ran out of the dude's car, looked like her hands were tied, and she ran out of the car screaming, "Help me." He just grabbed her and put her back in the car.
Near the Walgreens and Fish Hawk, and some chick just ran out of the dude's car. Looked like her hands were tied. She ran out of the car, screaming, "Help me." He just grabbed her and put her back in the car. It's Walgreens and Fish Hawk. I don't know the address.
What kind of vehicle are they in?
It's a blue SUV. Looks like an Enclave. Trying to get the license plate. It looks like GLH M32. It's a dark blue SUV.
Are they still there?
He's pulling out right now. Watching what direction he goes. Blue Saturn. It's not a Buick. Yeah, he was going into the neighborhood. He turned off the main street. She dropped a shirt. I work here at the fucking Walgreens.
Did you notice any weapons at all on him at all or anything?
I didn't approach him in case there was. The shirt blanket. Let me see what the fuck it is. Don't touch it. It's just a blanket. That's laying here in the middle of the road. Do you want me to try to keep anyone from getting to it, or do you want me to collect it into a bag without touching it?
I said for now, just let's leave it there. Kind of, make sure no one messes with it until my deputies get there. So.
Okay, I'll hang out front here, thanks.
So the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office were informed of this call. They were given the license plate number, and it quickly became a statewide search for this vehicle and possible kidnapped woman. 2 days later, an officer at Little Harbor Resort spotted this vehicle. Backup was called, and the police would begin following an SUV as it took off. As they surrounded it, when it parked, they were drawing guns and then began telling the man to put down his weapon. He had a razor blade, but it wasn't to the woman, it was on his own throat. An officer brought the woman to his police car and then took her down to the station. Alisa had been rescued. She began telling investigators her story, all while she was still tied up with a rope around her arm. She claimed that she had attempted to flee at Walgreens, and then they had driven to a very secluded rural area. They hung out there for over a day. She said that most of the time Trevor spent his time writing. He wrote a confession and a farewell to their children. Alisa remembered part of it, saying, "We should have never gone down the road of divorce that tore our family apart. So we have ended it for your sake, and we will be watching you from heaven." That day on the 12th, he had raped her 2 more times, and she said that all that she was thinking was that she needed to stay alive. The next morning, they drove to that Little Harbor Resort, which is somewhere they frequented as a family. They didn't stay there, though. Trevor pulled the SUV behind the dumpster and climbed into the back seat. That's when he grabbed a rope from the back and wrapped it around Alisa's neck. She knew he was killing her there. Then suddenly he let go and jumped in the front seat and took off. He began to say he was spotted, and he pulled into a home's carport and just sat there hiding. He then pulled the razor blade out and placed it on his own throat. He began slitting his throat, saying, "This is what love is," while Alisa screamed at the top of her lungs. She was telling him to stop. But this is when the police would show up to rescue her after 55 hours of terror. Photos were taken of her injuries, and she was taken in for medical treatment.
I did feel many times through the ordeal that this was going to be the end. From there, it went on for hours of attack, adrenaline. I didn't know that I was going to be able to get out of that car. And God made a way for me to get out of the car, saying that he is going to kill me. He is going to kill me. And I was just looking the whole time for any opportunity. And I'm so grateful and thankful to the employee at the Walgreens that saw what happened and took the action to call and got my license plate. That saved my life. I was just holding out hope the whole time, and as the hours ticked by, I just held on to that hope because I felt the love. I felt like everybody was looking for me and praying for me, and that just kept every hour got me through. I do feel that now I'm safe, and he's going to be behind bars and not be able to hurt me again.
But her abductor and estranged husband had survived as well, his own wound to himself. He had been arrested, but he was also obviously in need of medical treatment. So after doctors stitched up his throat, investigators went to talk to Trevor Summers. What he would admit would amount to a confession, according to investigators. When Trevor was interrogated in the hospital on March 13th, he was told that he was in their custody. He started by saying that all of this started a while ago, back in January, when his wife started online dating. He admitted he got upset because his wife put pictures of their kids on the website. He asked her to take it down, and she did, but then he found her on another website. And this was already the point of their separation. He said that Alisa was telling him that they were just talking, not dating. He then spoke about that Alisa and him would hang out several different times over those 3 months between January and March. He began to say that the oldest two children, Arden and Landon, saw her talking to another man on the phone and were mad at her due to this. He said that he told them that Alisa had told him that it was just platonic and that they needed to trust her.
And so I told my kids the next day on Wednesday, this is what Mom said, just, you need to believe her. And my son, who's 12, didn't believe her. And they were with her that weekend. That Friday night, he took her phone and took pictures of everything in her phone. He sent me a few things and just told me, look, I told you so.
Trevor then spoke about that night where he held a machete to Alisa's neck, and he said that Alisa began to admit a relationship with another man was more than platonic. But he said that she said she regretted it. They allegedly had sex that night and they fell asleep together, and when they woke up, he wanted to keep talking and she wanted to leave, so then he got out his machete. He said that when she left, she'd promised she would end it with this guy. He admitted that during that time he was not forthright with the police when they questioned him. He also admitted that he had lied to the police, saying that she was making it all up just to put him in jail.
I didn't know how the day was going to turn out. I was pretty upset with her when I found out all this stuff. I'd actually had a machete just in my bedroom. When she didn't want to keep talking, I got it out and told her we need to keep talking. I didn't hurt her or anything.
Why would you, if you just wanted her to talk, why would you bring a machete into the conversation?
Just so she would stay and talk.
Trevor said he didn't want the kids seeing Alisa because she was lying to them about her dating. But he said that they wanted to go back to her that week prior to her 55 hours of terror that he would put her through. In fact, he had convinced his daughter, but he'd actually convinced his daughter to let him say goodbye to his wife, leaving the window open. He said that after all the kids left, all that Alisa and him did was talk and sleep. That she did not leave during all those times that he was asleep and that she could have. However, he never mentioned anything about tying her up and drugging her with NyQuil.
I convinced my daughter to let me come say bye. I was trying to wake her up because I didn't want to startle the two little kids that were sleeping with her. Finally, she did wake up, freaked out a little bit because I was there. She knows I'm not supposed to be there because of the temporary injunction.
The police asked him what he tied her up with, and he stated just some nylon rope, but that she was halfway out of her ties at one point when he had left the room. And he also said that they had consensual sex 4 times. He said he was broken mentally because Alisa would tell him that she loved him, she would have sex with him, and that she was dating someone else and wanted a divorce.
We had sex 4 times, consensual. It wasn't forced, nothing. Completely consensual.
Well, forgive me, but I gotta ask, if you guys are in the middle of getting a divorce and separating and divvying up property and the kids and what have you, that would lead me to believe that there's issues between the two of y'all. But the way you're explaining it, where you guys would have sex on a regular basis,
I know.
I'm confused.
This is what messed with my head, and I think this is what broke me mentally. Was she's telling me she loves me, she's telling me we can work it out, we're having sex, but then she's dating but then she wants, to go full with the divorce. So I really can't explain. She'll have to explain why she's back and forth like that.
But then he began to state that he did in fact grab a pillow, place it over her face, thinking that he could end it right then and there. He said that he was just pretending that he could hurt her, that he wasn't actually going to go through with it. But eventually he said that they were both going to go on the boat, that they agreed that their kids could be raised by their parents or a pastor, and so she willingly got in the car with him to go on this boat. And that's when he finally mentioned the cold medicine, because he said that Alisa had a cold and that she had been using the NyQuil at home, and that's why they went to pick more up for her cold. He then talked about putting Alisa back into the car when she was running around the parking lot in Walgreens, and that he knew that someone had probably seen them and probably called the police. He said after Walgreens he was headed to a marina, but he was too tired to make it that night, so they stopped. He said he tried to cut the restraints off of Alisa, and that's where she got the wrist injury instead of the intentional cut Alisa said he made. He spoke about how when they had sex, she had orgasms and that she still didn't run away and she wanted to be with him. But then she started saying that she didn't want to go on the boat. She wanted to stay with the kids. So that is why they weren't actually on the boat when they were found. Trevor told police that Alisa had made him write the notes saying that she would get everything he left behind if she went back to the kids and he went on the boat and disappeared. In exchange, she said she would not tell police what he did. He then told Alisa that he couldn't kill her and he couldn't live his life, so he was going to cut his own neck. But after all of that, Trevor Summers was charged with 11 counts, including attempted murder, kidnapping, sexual battery, grand theft auto, violating a restraining order, and child neglect. He pleaded not guilty, but his manipulative, narcissistic behavior was in full force for his trial, forcing his wife and children to fight to be heard once again against his lies and persistence to control the narrative. It also turned out that Trevor was telling the truth. January 2017, when he told Alisa that he was facing prison time. He actually was awaiting sentencing for pleading guilty to wire fraud charges because there was a 2008 federal lawsuit accusing him of having more than 20 civil suits filed against him. Also for serving probation on minor charges such as passing bad checks and also filing bankruptcy 3 times during 2004 and 2006. Also for falsely claiming to hold patents on straws that could be printed with safe ink but was actually just to scam and defraud investors. He had already lost a $4 million judgment in 2011, but it's unknown if the plaintiffs ever collected that. So he was awaiting sentencing for that at that time. But there were also records of when Trevor held Alisa at his home with a machete to her neck. Investigators would speak about how they handled the situation, why no one was arrested, and Hillsborough County Sheriff Sergeant Christopher Steele said that they couldn't have arrested him that day based on the statements. They needed more, which is an unfortunate statement that happens in a lot of domestic violence situations where these people are not reprimanded until it's too late. Now, the trial began in August of 2022, 5 years later due to COVID delays, and Trevor's lawyer, Anthony Marquez, said that Trevor had no murderous intent. He stopped. Otherwise, she would be dead. He didn't do anything illegal, and in his mind, he could see consent. Now, this was Trevor's 7th lawyer on the case, and he said the testimony from Mrs. Summers will be that she was tied up and that she had no alternative. But there's some inconsistencies. It's just a story. The prosecutor, Jennifer Johnson, said that Trevor's plan was always to take Alisa and harm her that night. The strongest evidence being the handwritten confession as well as the cell phone video of him saying that he was holding Alisa against her will. She said Alisa Summers thought she was living out the last few days of her life. She believed that the defendant, Trevor Summers, was going to kill her. And he didn't attempt one time to kill her, he attempted twice. So day 1 was August 23rd of 2022, and Deputy Forrest testified that he had responded to the 911 call. Deputy Forrest said that he spoke to the 911 caller, who was Randall Crosby, who is the Walgreens employee. They also obtained the CCTV footage from the Walgreens showing Alisa and Trevor. When he ran the plates, he found that the owner of the vehicle had a restraining order. So when they found this out, Alisa's divorce attorney was involved, and they made a statement that they were very concerned for their client because she expressed fear of her husband. But one of the huge huge statements that would come out of this trial was from the survivor herself, Alisa. She would bravely take the stand in front of her captor, and by this point, she was remarried. She had her job as a Medicare insurance agent, and she was doing really well. But she gave even more detail on what had happened to her. She spoke about the incident in February where he held a machete to her, saying that he had told her she destroyed the family and she was not going to get away with it. The reports shown to the jury showed the restraining order put in place and that the two were no longer speaking or seeing one another. Then she said that it was March 10th, a Friday, when she picked up the 3 kids at the park near Trevor's home to have them that night. So they stayed that night. They all went back to her home. They were watching movies together and she was dozing off. So she asked if they wanted to go sleep in the bed. And the 2 youngest, Brent and Grady, did. Arden told her mom that she was going to keep watching movies and just sleep on the couch. Now, Alisa would testify that she had woken up at 3 a.m. and she saw a man standing over her. It was a silhouette. She started screaming, asking who was in her house, and then the figure backed up against the wall, telling her to calm down. Alisa instantly knew this voice and knew it was Trevor, so she started throwing things off of her nightstand at him because she was terrified. She heard her ex-husband's voice, and that didn't bring her any comfort. In fact, it did the complete opposite. And then Trevor grabbed her feet and drug her body off of the bed, and that is when Grady and Bryn were in a panic, saying, "Daddy, don't kill Mommy." During the struggle with Trevor, when things would quiet down, Alisa would hear one of her children yelling out, "Mommy?" And when she could get a word out, she would tell them everything was okay. Alisa spoke about how she could finally see Trevor in the light, and he was wearing pants with scarves tied all the way around his belt to the point where it looked like he was wearing a dress. These scarves also belonged to Alisa. Alisa was asked about her daughter Arden that night, and she needed to take a breath on the stand. She then explained that Arden grabbed Bryn and Grady and walked back out the front door, and Trevor told her that his parents were coming to pick them up. About 6 a.m. was when Alisa was first tied up with the Christmas cords, and then also a vacuum cord. A sock was placed in her mouth and a scarf was wrapped around her head. She said that Trevor told her he was going to be leaving at about 9 a.m., only 3 hours after that, to get on the boat. But that time came and went, and he said there were no more boats, so he had to wait till that night. He then was said to untie her and have non-consensual sex with her. She said she didn't say no, but she also didn't want to get hurt. She said that eventually Trevor told her that he was going to leave and have someone come and tie her. So he did. He left the room. She didn't know if he left the house, and she waited 30 minutes before she started trying to untie herself. That's when he came back in the room and had the most terrifying look. She said she knew he was going to kill her. That's when he began to push the pillow against her face, straddling her with his full body weight, and she began to cry as she knew she was going to meet Jesus. On the second day of trial, it was time for cross-examination of Alisa, but the defense attorney, Mr. Marquez, stood up and told the judge she was fired. Trevor Summers asked the judge if he could represent himself with his lawyer as standby counsel. Trevor said he didn't believe his lawyer fully understood the circumstances of events. This request was granted, and many would later say that he did this to cross-examine his own victim, and he had a need to control everything. Trevor would question his victim, and this would go on for 4 hours. She couldn't look in his direction, focused just on the jury. She answered his questions, but very matter of fact. Trevor then began pushing Alisa on the fact that it was dark, but she said she knew the color of the scarves. She said that he later tied her up with those scarves and it was light outside.
You came in and you put the pillow over my face with full force.
Okay. In your statement here in this courtroom, you said that the look on my face was of death or of murder.
Evil and hatred.
How do you... I'm sorry, no, I believe your statement was that you knew I was going to kill you when you saw my face. Correct?
Yes.
How did you know what was in my heart? How did you know what was in my mind?
All I saw was an expression of evil and hatred. And at that time, my thought is, he's here to kill me. I'm going to die. I was in complete shock. I can't believe that I'm alive.
Trevor would then ask Alisa, "Did I threaten you or force you to have sex with me?"
Did I threaten you to have sex?
You broke into my home in the middle of the night when I was sleeping, attacked me and tied me up. I take that as, yes, you threatened me to have sex with you. Yes.
I'm asking you specifically, before we had sex, did I threaten you or force you to have sex with me?
My answer is yes, you forced me to have sex with you.
Did I hold you down?
No.
Did I push you?
Not at that time of having sex, but prior to having sex, you did push me, you did hold me down, you did tie me up, you did attack me, and you did break into my home when I was sleeping. You raped me.
So you're calling it rape?
It is. That is the definition of rape, to come into someone's home and attack them and tie them up and then have sex with them. That is the definition of rape.
Did you know I was coming to your house?
No!
She was infuriated. And I cannot believe that the courts would even allow this to occur.
Speak about the sexual encounters as casual. It is something that is a common thing between the victim and I at that time and prior to that. And the victim herself stated that sex doesn't mean that much to her.
I mean, that doesn't mean that someone who is of that position can't be sexually battered just because sex doesn't mean that much to her.
I understand, Your Honor, and I'm explaining to you as best I can without testifying as to the situation at the time. But I can just assert that none of my statements have, whether recorded or not, have led to there to be any belief that that I intended to do that out of coercion, out of desire, out of anything other than just something that her and I agreed to do to pass the time.
Arden was actually the one that used her key to get into the home prior to this attack, when there were writings on the wall, Kool-Aid in her bed, because Arden had participated in trashing the home with their father. She had come up with a plan to write on the walls. Trevor had put Kool-Aid in the bed. And this is when Arden would actually take the stand. She was now 19, and she would admit on the evening of March 10th, she'd texted her father, as she was supposed to, telling him that her mother was fast asleep. She let him know the coast was clear to enter the home and bombard her as she slept. Arden said she had instructions to leave the window open after midnight on March 11th, and then Trevor would leave the 3-year-old Cooper at his home sleeping. He would then drive himself and 12-year-old Landon to the home. Now, as Trevor entered through the window, Arden would say that she exited the window and walked towards his car to sit with Landon. They waited down the street in his van, thinking that their parents would come out, having reconciled with the 2 siblings still in the home. This never happened, and when her father finally told her to drive her siblings home, she went inside, got them. She said she didn't see anything happening other than conversation between her mom and dad. She just thought that they were taking longer than expected. So she was tasked with driving her siblings 30 minutes, and she was terrified. She did everything not to get pulled over, but she wanted to make it home to go and check on Cooper. And thankfully, they did make it home safely.
This was a man I trusted, and this was a man that I thought could do no wrong. And just to know that he used me to do what he wanted to do hurts more than anything.
She would testify that she was mad at her mother during that time because she had been moving on with her now husband 5 years later. Arden said that she and Trevor were originally going to carry out this plan, letting him in through the open window several days before, when Arden was with her mother originally. But she and her mother got into an argument about her father, so Arden was taken back to her father's house. So they had to try a few days later. There were also texts between Arden and Trevor that night where Trevor texted, "Make sure she's not video chatting," and introducing them to that guy, talking about the younger siblings. He also texted her to look in Lisa's purse to see if she had birth control pills. At 12:31 in the morning, Arden texted Landon, "How far away are you?" And Landon texted back, "Not too far, 10 minutes. And then at 5:03, Arden texts Trevor, "Are you almost done?" And he responds, "Yes, stay in the car." 10 minutes later, he tells them to come in and get Brennan Grady. During cross-examination by her own father, Arden said she didn't remember anything about her parents fighting physically. Now, Bryn, who is now 13 years old, also testified as well, and she remembered waking up to her mother yelling at her father, sounding worried or scared. Hours later, she and Grady were taken to the car, and Arden drove them to their dad, saying that she was going to drive like an old man. During cross-examination, Trevor asked if she remembered if he was yelling anything back at Mommy. Bryn said no. At the end of Bryn's cross-examination, her father said, "It's good to see you." Now, Arden would later tell 48 Hours that the guilt of playing a role in what happened to her mother versus what she was told was going to happen weighs heavily on her. She did not realize she was being manipulated, and she said that she has had many issues trusting people after what happened. She has to tell herself it wasn't her fault. She said prior to this, she admired her father. They had a great relationship. They would go out on daddy-daughter dates. But Arden also made a victim impact statement to the court saying that she now resented him for betraying her trust. She said, "Now I stand here today stronger than I was before, ready for the sickening chapter to end. I am ready for the end, for the peace of mind. I may no longer be a child, but I can allow my inner child to heal." The judge then looked at Arden and said, "You should not feel guilty for anything that you did in this case. I assure you of that." Now, Trevor Summers was then sentenced to 3 life sentences, followed by 224 years in prison. Alisa was relieved, but she was surprised because the sentence was much more than she expected. Alisa would say that being in court was horrendous, especially because her 3 children had to testify. She said it's the last place you want your children in, and it traumatized them from hearing everything that their father had done. She said that he represented himself so that he could grill her on the stand, and she couldn't even breathe while he talked. Alisa said that for a long time she was triggered if she even saw a man who looked like Trevor. She had nightmares. She would wake up screaming. She said it's taken all sorts of different forms of therapy, but she finally feels good, and now he can't hurt anybody else. She said she has the best support system, and now she has her children to keep her going. She said, "My unconditional love for them overcame their father's evil intent." She even helps domestic violence survivors through advocacy and has written a book, and she said, "You think what you're going through is going to be forever, but there's healing on the other side." Honestly, this is a sentence that I'm almost excited to tell you about. It's a sentence of a judge and jury who knew that this man should not be let out onto the streets. And there are so many cases where that's the complete opposite, and we get these sentences that are so flimsy that we know they most definitely are going to be out in the public again. So this is just, I think, a wonderful showcase of the justice system. And it's so nice to see after we saw the case of Colin and the fact that he allegedly got away with both the killings of his father and his mother that happened a year apart and that have been deemed self-defense, and he is now a free teenager who everyone thinks is a killer. So I'll have that video linked down below if you haven't watched that, because oh my god, that is a infuriating one. But this one seems like Alisa actually got justice. She is now Alisa Matthewson, which is her new husband's last name. That is what she goes by, and she is a survivor. So I'm very happy to be able to tell her story to you today. I don't think it minimizes it at all that her abductor, her torturer, was her ex-husband. It doesn't make it consensual because she was once married to this man, or was still technically married. They hadn't gotten a divorce yet. That does not make it consensual at all, and she made sure to tell him that. In a situation where you can fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, one of them is fawn for a reason. Doing whatever you can to just make sure that that person doesn't hurt you. I will have the playlist linked down below on more survivor stories if you would like to listen, but don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.